Okay. Hey, Rob, how are you today?
Good, Lewis. How are you?
I'm doing well, and I appreciate you making the time to talk with me on women saving the world now.
Mhm.
And you and I, met really kind of briefly at an event in the spring, and for Global Green USA, and I had previously interviewed Diane Meyer-Simon for the site, and so it was kind of ironic that you and I got into conversation following that a few weeks back and really started to talk about this role of women globally. And so I wanted to open up the dialogue with you. I think the first thing that prompted me to do this was in not only observing the role that women were playing globally in advancing women in world economy and education, but then when the Dalai Lama came forth last fall and made the proclamation that the world would be saved by Western women, it started a whole chain of thought process for me, and I'd like to get your thoughts on what that meant to you.
Well, I start from the sort of the personal, which is I grew up with some very strong women in my family,
Hmm.
women that I have great respect for, and one in particular, my sister, who is considerably older than I am and was part of the early women's lib movement in the 70s, and was one of the sort of you know original, I say, grassroots organizers, and was mobilizing for causes, almost probably a new cause every month. So I got a chance to see the power and effect that women had on issues from the environment in the original Earth Day to nuclear weapon proliferation. And she was a very influential person on me because, she's 7 years older than I am. Was, at the at the threshold of a new social revolution in terms of how women impact society. Clearly, having grown up with parents who played more traditional roles and uh, mom and dad who are still married 60 years later, still playing that traditional role.
Hmm.
So, in having sort of experienced some more cause-oriented activities myself, both in the green space and specifically in the water space,
Hmm.
I got to see how women really play a powerful role around the world. When you talk about water, it's the women who go out and, find the water, get the water out of the well if there's a well, or out of the river, or if it's a dirty river or lake or creek. And then they have to carry that back on their heads. The men don't do that. It's the women that bear the children.
Hmm.
So women have this obvious biological and innate ability to absorb suffering in
Hmm.
a way that I think we as men obviously are biologically predisposed. They're much more interdirected. And so they're, from my perspective and experience in working around the world and having strong female role models in my life, they have a greater capacity, I think, overall to harness their power and their energy, specifically for social impact and social change.
Hmm.
This is, I think, part of their DNA. It's not.
Hmm.
I don't think it's quite as natural to us as men.
Hmm. So I would agree with you. I think that there is something that oftentimes will click. I think in a woman's process around creating solution that is a more collaborative partnership piece than I think the way we may sometimes perceive it in a traditional sort of male approach to looking at a situation. Have you observed that as well?
Absolutely. I think collaboration once again is part of their DNA. It's intrinsic to who they are. I mean, men have a tendency to be much more, I find, ego driven. We're very goal oriented. We're obviously very outer directed, and
Mm-hmm.
so we think we can go it alone. That's
Mm-hmm.
part of our evolutionary history. Go it alone. Slay the lion, bring the food back to the family, whatever
Right.
the situation is. So women definitely, I think, are I found much more collaborative. Women's collectives obviously are a very big thing. Women's movements. It almost seems uh, paradoxical to say women's movement in a
Mm-hmm.
sense, because women collectively and naturally form movements because they're there to support not only each other but their family. They raise the children. They often, fetch the water, and they often, pick the crops to feed the family.
So as men, as we're looking at a lot of social and environmental issues on the planet today that need resolution and solution, do we learn from our sisters, mothers, daughters, in terms of how leadership can happen, how change can happen, and if so, what should we be learning, or should we be looking to?
Yeah, it's a great question. The answer is yes. We should be looking to them because they are natural leaders. They're natural leaders with a much higher level of compassion.
Hmm.
Once again, that compassion I would surmise is intrinsic, innate to who they are. Um, Women, don't come from the ego quite as often. That's not to say that women don't have egos, and a woman in a man's world feels compelled to compete with the man and often, ends up competing on the same way in the same level as a man because she feels that's the only way she can survive in a man's world.
Hmm.
But I think that as men, uh, if we can sort of open ourselves up to understanding the way a woman works, not that we're going to be able to do it naturally because
Hmm.
we're, a different part of the species, that I think we'll start opening up to the possibilities of leading through compassion and leading through collaboration and collective as opposed through to ego and more sort of violent kind of means. There's a great discussion around the topic and a discipline, in fact, around the topic of power versus force.
Hmm.
Men are very forceful
Hmm.
in trying to achieve what we think is our power.
Uh-huh.
Women are powerful. They're not as forceful. We tend to think of them that way in certain relationship sort of constructs, but they have an innate power that has been obviously bred over time.